In the bloodied streets of Sevastopol, a 25-year-old history student named Lyudmila Pavlichenko peered through her rifle scope and whispered a number: 309. That's how many fascist invaders she had killed, 36 of them enemy snipers who had hunted her just as she hunted them. Months later, standing in the White House beside Eleanor Roosevelt, she would tell American men, "Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" She was one of 2,484 female snipers deployed by the Soviet Union. Fewer than 500 survived the war, a casualty rate exceeding 80% that shatters any myth that this was a safer assignment. In 1941, the Soviet Union faced annihilation. Endless columns of German panzers rolled east. Stuka dive bombers screamed from cloudless skies. Soviet villages burned in their wake. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's surprise invasion, crashed into Soviet territory with overwhelming force. The Wehrmacht captured vast territories within weeks. The Red Army, caught in disorganization, hemorrhaged soldiers. Entire divisions vanished. Equipment shortages turned into catastrophes. Moscow itself stood within reach of Wehrmacht advance units. Stalin's regime teetered on the edge of collapse. In this desperate hour, Soviet commanders faced an impossible equation. How do you stop the most powerful military machine ever assembled when your armies are in full retreat, your factories evacuated, and your soldiers dying faster than you can train them? The answer emerged not from innovation, but from survival instinct. Snipers. One marksman with one rifle could eliminate high-value targets. German officers coordinating assaults, machine gunners anchoring defensive positions, radio operators directing artillery. A single well-placed bullet could paralyze an entire platoon. Enemy units would halt, dig in, waste precious hours hunting for a ghost they'd never see. This wasn't tactical preference. This was asymmetric warfare born of necessity. As the Germans entrenched themselves in fortified positions and established machine gun nests across no man's land, Soviet commanders recognized that concealed marksmen could dominate these killing zones. They could support infantry advances without requiring the tanks, artillery, or air support the Red Army simply didn't have. The Germans' increasing reliance on fortified positions created opportunities. Soviet snipers could own the space between the trenches with minimal resources. The decision was made. The Soviet Union would deploy snipers at a scale never before attempted in military history. Over 400,000 Soviet soldiers would receive basic sniper instruction during the war. Approximately 9,000 would be formally recognized as elite snipers, an unprecedented mobilization that transformed the Eastern Front into a deadly chess match played one bullet at a time. The weapon of choice? The Mosin Nagant 9130 fitted with a PU scope. Approximately 53,000 of these sniper rifles would be produced between 1941 and 1945. Simple, rugged, deadly. Cheap enough to mass produce. Reliable enough to function in the brutal Russian winter. Accurate enough to kill at ranges between 800 and 1,000 meters. But in this desperate moment, Soviet commanders recognized something more profound. A weapon that required no factories, no complex supply chains, only patience, skill, and a willingness to hunt. They would transform their greatest resource, the Soviet people themselves, into an army of ghosts. These weren't super soldiers. They were ordinary Soviet citizens, weathered Siberian hunters who'd tracked elk through taiga forests, young women bent over university textbooks, factory workers with calloused hands still stained with machine oil. Yet from this vast reservoir of humanity, Stalin would forge his most feared weapon. The recruitment strategy was brutally pragmatic. Soviet commanders scoured rural regions for anyone with hunting experience, anyone who understood wind, patience, and the art of remaining invisible. Thousands arrived at training centers having never fired a military rifle. But they carried skills passed down through generations. How to read animal tracks in snow, how to construct natural blinds, how to wait motionless for hours. these traditional competencies would be weaponized. The training programs emphasized psychological resilience above all else. Instructors subjected recruits to simulated artillery barrages during live fire exercises, sleep deprivation drills, anything to prepare them for the grinding horror of the front. The curriculum taught more than marksmanship. It taught how to endure stress that would break ordinary soldiers, how to control breathing when your heart screamed for you to run, how to lie in your own waste for 12 to 24 hours at a time, waiting for a single shot. And here's what shattered every assumption about women's roles in combat. Up to 2,484 of them were female. The Central Women's Sniper Training School became a factory of lethal precision. It graduated over 2,000 women who would be deployed to the war's most savage battlegrounds. This wasn't some symbolic gesture. Fewer than 500 survived. A casualty rate exceeding 80% that demolished any notion this was a safer alternative to frontline infantry service. These women endured the same brutal training, carried the same rifles, died in the same ruins as their male counterparts. Their weapon embodied Soviet industrial philosophy perfectly. While Germany produced fewer than 20,000 sniper variant Kar-98K rifles during the entire war, Soviet factories produced approximately 53,000 Mosin Nagants. The 3.5 times magnification PU scope was simpler and more robust than Germany's 4 times ZF-39, which was often more precise but less durable under harsh conditions. The Soviet scope could be field repaired with basic tools. It functioned flawlessly in temperatures that turned German weapons into useless metal clubs. The rifle's effective range of 800 to 1,000 meters exceeded the Kar-98K's 600 to 800 meters. It cost significantly less to manufacture due to mass production techniques and simpler design. In a war of attrition, these advantages multiplied across tens of thousands of rifles. The Germans might have had better optics in ideal conditions, but Soviet snipers had weapons that worked when it mattered, in mud, in snow, in the frozen hell of Stalingrad. Armed with these simple but deadly rifles, trained to endure psychological and physical extremes, these newly minted snipers would be deployed to the war's most brutal battlegrounds. 2 of them would become legends whose names echo through history. Look at this photograph. Lyudmila Pavlichenko in 1941, a 25-year-old history student, dark hair pulled back, eyes squinting against the sun, looking like any young woman you'd pass on the street. Now look at this one. The same woman, 6 months later, face hardened, Mosin Nagant cradled across her chest, eyes scanning a horizon most people would never see. She insisted on joining the infantry, not the medical corps where women were expected to serve. The recruiting officer tried to refuse. She showed him her marksmanship certificate from a shooting club. He relented. Therefore, by the time she was wounded and withdrawn from combat in 1942, she had amassed 309 confirmed kills. 36 of them were enemy snipers, men who'd been hunting her even as she hunted them. She became the highest-scoring female sniper in history. Pavlichenko's diary entries and interviews reveal the psychological cost of this transformation. She describes the exhilaration of a perfect shot, the way time seemed to slow as the crosshairs settled on a target 800 meters away. But she also writes about the terror, lying motionless for hours or even days in a shell hole, German boots passing within arm's reach, knowing that one sneeze, one cough, one moment of cramping muscle would mean death. She writes about her fellow graduates from the sniper school, the deep bonds formed between women facing odds that killed 4 out of 5 of them, the names of friends crossed out one by one. The duality haunted her, pride in her skill, terror at discovery, the constant calculation of wind, distance, the slight tremor in her hands from exhaustion. She recorded moments of dark humor, joking with other female snipers about which of them would die first. The gallows comedy of soldiers who knew the statistics. Then came her second act. Too valuable to risk losing, too wounded to continue fighting, Pavlichenko became something else, a propaganda weapon aimed at America. In 1942, she became the first Soviet citizen to visit the White House and speak about her experiences. Eleanor Roosevelt took her on a speaking tour. At one rally, facing an audience of comfortable men who'd never heard a shot fired in anger, she delivered words that made headlines across America. "I am 25 years old and have already killed 309 fascist invaders. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" The room went silent, then erupted. Her story demonstrates that the sniper war was a national movement transcending gender. Female snipers faced the same deadly conditions as their male counterparts. The casualty rate exceeding 80% proves their frontline role. These weren't nurses or clerks. They were hunters, killers, warriors who earned their place through blood and skill. While Pavlichenko shamed American audiences, another sniper was making history in Stalingrad's ruins, a shepherd from the Urals who would teach the world a new way to hunt men. Through your crosshairs, you watch German soldiers picking their way through Stalingrad's rubble. They move cautiously, scanning windows, checking corners, but they don't see you. This is the perspective Vasily Zaitsev perfected, a shepherd from the Urals who would become the most feared sniper on the Eastern Front. Zaitsev brought rural hunting skills to Stalingrad's urban hellscape. His impact was immediate. By the battle's end, he'd amassed 225 confirmed kills. But those numbers tell only part of the story. His true revolution was tactical. He developed what became known as the Sixes, deploying snipers in rotating teams of 6, 3 pairs, covering overlapping sectors. This wasn't just about firepower, it was about survival. While one pair engaged targets, another observed, and the third rested. They could maintain coverage for 24 hours, multiplying their effectiveness exponentially while protecting each other from German counter-snipers. The results were staggering. Official Soviet estimates attribute over 11,000 German casualties to snipers during Stalingrad alone. By late 1942, snipers comprised up to 3% of divisional personnel, quantifiable evidence that this wasn't propaganda. It was doctrine. The sniper war had become institutionalized at the tactical level, with dedicated platoons receiving priority for match-grade ammunition and specialized support. Then came the duel that made Zaitsev a legend. The story goes that a German sniper school chief named Major Koenig was sent specifically to kill him. For days, they stalked each other through the ruins, false targets, psychological warfare, patience measured in heartbeats. The climax came when sunlight glinted off Koenig's scope, and Zaitsev took the shot that ended the hunt. Here's the truth. No German records confirm Koenig ever existed. The duel was likely exaggerated, possibly fabricated entirely for morale. Yet its impact was undeniable. Soviet soldiers believed it, German soldiers feared it, and the psychological warfare was as real as any bullet. The story became a rallying point, a symbol of Soviet ingenuity defeating German precision. But Zaitsev's greatest legacy wasn't his rifle. It was his classroom. In Stalingrad's ruins, he trained dozens of Zaichata, little hares. He systematized sniper tactics that had been improvised into doctrine that could be taught. Camouflage techniques, firing positions, how to read German patrol patterns, how to exploit the brief moments of carelessness that came with exhaustion. His students spread across the Eastern Front, each one a force multiplier, carrying his methods into new battles. The tactics worked because they were simple. Pairs of snipers working together, one spotting, one shooting, then switching roles. Moving positions after every third shot to avoid counterfire. Using the rubble itself as both concealment and firing platform. Exploiting the Germans' reliance on routine, on predictable movement patterns born of military discipline. Zaitsev's teachings spread through the Red Army like wildfire. His Zaichata trained others. Those students trained more. The multiplication effect extended his influence across the entire front. Therefore, When the Germans adapted their tactics, when they deployed their own counter-snipers, they were fighting not just one shepherd from the Urals, but an entire generation of marksmen who'd learned his methods. The Germans were watching, and they were adapting, deploying their own hunters to stalk the stalkers in a deadly game where the slightest mistake meant death. The war became a war of nerves. German after-action reports and soldiers' letters reveal a mounting psychological crisis, constant vigilance, operations paralyzed by fear, the terror of an enemy who could kill from 800 meters and vanish like smoke. German snipers reported frustration at the skill and concealment of Soviet marksmen, high anxiety, constant vigilance, the grinding psychological toll of being hunted. One Wehrmacht testimony captured it perfectly. You never see them. You just hear the crack, and someone is dead. The Germans fought back. Specialized Wehrmacht sniper detachments were deployed specifically to hunt the hunters, elite marksmen using triangulation to locate Soviet firing positions, coordinated artillery barrages on suspected nests, dedicated hunter teams that turned Stalingrad into a deadly chess match. The sniper war evolved into something far more complex than Soviet propaganda suggested, a dynamic contest of adaptation and counter-adaptation, where both sides bled. German counter-snipers studied Soviet methods. They learned to recognize the subtle signs, disturbed rubble, sight lines that offered both concealment and fields of fire, the patterns of Soviet movement. They deployed their own pairs and teams, used decoys and false targets, called in artillery on any suspected position. The Eastern Front became a laboratory of death where every innovation spawned a counter-innovation. And bleed they did. The average frontline sniper's lifespan was often measured in months due to their high-risk assignments. Female snipers faced the worst odds. Fewer than 500 of the 2,484 women who served as snipers would see victory. The casualty rate exceeding 80% demolished any notion this was a safer assignment. The reasons were simple and brutal. Snipers operated alone or in pairs, often deep in enemy territory or exposed positions. They couldn't retreat quickly when discovered. Artillery and mortars targeted their hides relentlessly. German counter-snipers hunted them with the same patience and skill they'd taught the Red Army to fear. Every shot risked discovery. Every day multiplied the odds of a mistake. Many survivors bore scars that ran deeper than their wounds. Pavlichenko, like many snipers, struggled with post-war trauma and reintegration challenges. She finished her history degree, became a public figure. But the woman who'd tracked 309 targets through a scope found peace elusive in a world without crosshairs. The same skills that had kept her alive, hypervigilance, the ability to remain motionless for hours, the constant calculation of threat and distance, became liabilities in civilian life. Female veterans faced additional burdens. Despite their wartime heroism, many encountered gender discrimination. The Soviet propaganda machine had celebrated them as symbols of equality during the war. But afterward, society expected them to return to traditional roles, to forget the killing, to become wives and mothers and never speak of the things they'd done. Yet the legacy endured. Modern Russian military doctrine still places snipers at its core. They occupy a revered place in national memory. Veterans became symbols of the great patriotic war's triumph. Their methods were studied, refined, and integrated into contemporary operations. The lessons spread beyond Russia. Militaries worldwide adopted Soviet innovations, decentralized marksmen as force multipliers, psychological warfare as tactical doctrine, urban combat tactics born in Stalingrad's ruins, team-based deployment for mutual protection. The Ghost Warriors proved something fundamental about asymmetric warfare, that in total war, a single skilled individual could tip the balance, that desperation could forge innovation, that ordinary citizens, shepherds, students, factory workers, could become instruments of strategic impact when properly trained and deployed. The scale remains unmatched. No modern conflict has approached the Soviet Union's mobilization of 400,000 trained marksmen, with 9,000 elite snipers operating simultaneously across a front stretching thousands of kilometers. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, all featured skilled snipers, but none matched the Eastern Front's industrial-scale deployment of ghost warriors. The psychological impact proved as important as the body count. German units diverted resources from broader operational goals to hunt Soviet snipers. Morale suffered under the constant threat. Movement became cautious, predictable, exploitable. The fear of an unseen enemy who could kill at 800 meters paralyzed initiative. The ghost warriors of Stalingrad, Sevastopol, and 100 other battlefields paid an immense price for their role in stopping the Wehrmacht. But their legacy, both the reality and the myth, proved that in total war, the courage of individuals could tip the balance of empires. They were born from the ashes of Operation Barbarossa, when the Soviet Union stood on the brink of extinction and needed a new kind of warrior. Stalin's ghost warriors, shepherds, students, factory workers, proved that sometimes the most powerful force in a war of millions is a single person with a single rifle and one perfect shot. Their legacy endures not just in the 11,000 German casualties at Stalingrad or the 309 kills of Pavlichenko, but in the fundamental truth they demonstrated: that desperation, ingenuity, and individual courage can multiply into a force that changes the course of history, one bullet at a time. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.